Well, I hope AJ does become the favorite after that. That was pretty good. It is an honor to be here. And I have to tell you, speaking in chapel is not one of my most favorite things to do. There's a lot of stress that comes with it. So every once in a while, if I am asked, I kind of try to push it off. But when the director of chapel programming, Lisa Ishihara, when she talked to me about a year ago, and she said, would you be willing to speak at Grandparents' Day? I'm like, oh, that's not fair. Like, you're getting me in a weak place. I love my grandparents, loved my grandparents, and I love grandparents, and I may just have to accept this one. So I did. Although about a week ago, I was questioning why I did, but that's all right. I am here, and it is with a measure of great honor and respect that I get to share with you today. Well, knowing this was Grandparents' Day, I looked up a little bit of trivia. So I have just a few things, and you're welcome to talk to the person next to you to see if you can figure this out. Do you know what the average age of a U.S. grandparent is today? The average age of a U.S. grandparent. Go ahead. Give your guess to the person next to you. All right. The average age is 48. All right, did anyone guess that? Anyone guess? Oh, right here, we had some right on target. 48, can you believe that? In fact, just last night, my husband was telling me that 70 is the new 30. So, you know, we got a lot of years ahead of us. This is good stuff. All right, here's another one. What % of grandparents, either grandfathers or grandmothers, still bake cookies regularly? What % still bake cookies regularly? All right, the percentage for that, 86%. Keep those cookies coming. By the way, you can send cookies. Did you know that? You can box up cookies and send them. So there are many students on this campus who would be happy to be the recipients of those cookies. All right, here's a really random one I stumbled on. What % of grandparents have tattoos? Okay, are you ready? The answer to that, 10%. Okay, and I'm not going to ask anyone to prove that here. You just keep that one to yourself. So, and actually, if you want to drive any place, you should drive with your grandparents. Kids are 50% less likely to be injured in cars driven by grandparents than by their parents. All right, here's another one. And these are kind of shifting. Not so cheesy and fun, just really meaningful. About 3 out of 4 grandparents, 3 out of 4, think being a grandparent is the single most important and satisfying thing in their life. Amen. Nine in 10 or 90% enjoy talking about their grandkids to just about everyone. Research shows that children need 4 to 6 involved caring adults in their life to fully develop emotionally and socially. That means 1 or 2 parents in the home isn't going to cut it. 4 to 6 caring involved adults. Probably most of you as grandparents in this room have served in that capacity. And one last, 9 out of 10 or 90% of adults feel their grandparents influenced their values and behaviors. We are very grateful to have a day like this to honor you. You know, I'm not sure I could have gotten my own grandfather to have come to one of these. And if he had, he would have sat in the very back. Anytime he came to anything, church or an event or a sports thing, he always sat in the back just in case he thought he might get sick. Then he could leave. I don't ever remember my grandfather ever getting sick, but he always sat in the back. You know, so today I wonder, maybe he has a front row seat in heaven. I am here today in large measure because of the influence and the prayer life of my grandparents. But you know, they would never believe that. My grandpa had all kinds of jobs, but I think the one I remember is when he used to drive a tractor. I think it was for a loam field or lime field or something like that. And he would have to get up very early in the morning, and if we were visiting as grandkids, of course our parents would sleep in, but the treat for us was if we could get up early enough before Grandpa left for work, and we'd go to that kitchen table and just enjoy breakfast with Grandma and Grandpa. And I remember as Grandpa would leave, he would bring his big lunchbox. Now, it wasn't quite like this. I went to about 3 thrift stores trying to find the lunchbox of my grandfather, but I guess they're not around anymore. It was something like this. It was kind of a gray, almost a barn kind of shaped lunchbox. And he would head off in his overalls. He never understood why we would wear jeans for social occasions, because for him, jeans were only for work. But he would head off with that lunchbox, and we loved any minute we could get with Grandpa. The memory of my grandma would run around the house from dawn to dusk with her apron. And the one thing I remember, her apron always had a Kleenex in the pocket. This is not her original Kleenex, all right? But that is her apron. I do have her apron. But Grandma always had a Kleenex because she was always wiping her forehead. She worked incredibly hard. That's the image I have of my grandma. You know, my grandparents were immigrants. They actually built their own home, and it was small, but anyone was welcome in that room. They didn't have any education beyond high school, neither one, but they sure wanted it for us. They had 2 daughters. My grandpa so hoped that one of those daughters would become a doctor. That didn't happen. Then he really hoped that one of those 2 daughters would marry a doctor. But both of his 2 daughters married poor seminary men. And those 2 men became pastors. But their influence has gone around the globe. Frederick Buechner has said, "You enter the extraordinary by way of the ordinary." You enter the extraordinary by way of the ordinary. And I think the beauty of grandparents is that they are just so very ordinary. You know, I was trying to think, there's no such thing as a childhood song where you say, "My grandpa is better than yours," or "My grandma." That. You just sort of take them for who they are and love them as they are, even if it's a mostly unsung or unnoticed, perhaps, kind of influence in our life. But the problem is that ordinary is just so very ordinary, and most of us are not very satisfied with ordinary. You know, I think in many ways my grandfather was paralyzed by comparison. Meaning he was always trying to measure up, always comparing himself and never feeling like he had enough or could do enough or that he was enough. And actually, I think in many ways I can suffer from that same disease of always comparing and never feeling like I measure up. So for example, to be really vulnerable here for a moment, a few weeks ago when I was beginning to do more intentional planning for this, I actually wrote down some things that were on my mind. And this is what I wrote in thinking about this chapel. They don't want to hear me. Bring them one of our favorite Bible profs. I don't have anything of substance to say that they probably haven't already heard. What difference is one chapel going to make in the grand scheme of things? And if I do this, I need to be funny and tech savvy and memorable and powerful, and I need to make this worth people's time to be here. And I finally said, oh, help, what have I gotten myself into? I can't do this. I don't have what it takes. Lord, they should have asked someone else, someone who wasn't quite so ordinary. And I have to tell you, the Lord just sort of ignored my drama in that moment. And I felt like his voice spoke to my spirit, and it was like, you know what? Get a grip, get over this, and work with what you have. But what do I have? I had to come back and argue a little bit. What do I have? You see, it's sort of like going on a picnic. So you go on a picnic and you get close to lunch and it's time for lunch. And so the people you're with, they've brought this lunch basket, big lunch basket. And they open up their lunch basket and they pull out the fried chicken. They've got the coleslaw, the potato salad, the deviled eggs, and the homemade chocolate cake. And then you pull out your lunchbox. And in your lunchbox, you've got the turkey sandwich dry on fiber bread with some carrot sticks and apple slices. And you look in your box and you say, is that all I have? Because it's not much, and it certainly isn't very special. It's really just quite so ordinary. And you know, the irony is that as I kind of obsess over my own inadequacies, really, the people in my life, and you could probably think this right now too, the people in my life who have had the most significant and lasting impact were very ordinary people. My grandparents were those kind of ordinary people. Now, just for the fun of it, I actually Googled my grandparents. I thought if anyone can make you not ordinary, it's Google, right? We all got to show up on Google someplace. So I Googled Esther Timgren and Gus Timgren. And Google kept coming back with, did you mean? Or maybe you meant, or how about this instead of that? I'm like, no, I meant Gus Timgren and Esther Timgren. But my grandparents are actually so hopelessly ordinary, even Google could not find them. So how does this work? Is there truly a way to enter the extraordinary by way of the ordinary? And to maybe try and answer that question in some way, I want to look at the account of a boy with his lunch bag. And it's in John chapter 6. It's actually found in all 4 Gospels, but I'm just going to read and talk about John 6. It's John 6, 5 through 13. It's a familiar story, probably to many of you, but let me read it. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. And Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus, kind of ignoring the drama again, said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. So what can this very ordinary boy perhaps teach us about ordinary? I've got 3 points. It's very ordinary. If you figured it out, I'm the daughter of one of those 2 pastors, right? So I grew up with 3 points in a poem. That's what you're supposed to have. And if you can alliterate them, you get bonus points. All right, so 3 points, no PowerPoint. Can you take that today? Because they're very simple and they're very ordinary. I think you can remember them. Ordinary is now. Ordinary is enough. or we could say enough, and ordinary is needed. Ordinary is now. Ordinary is right now. Can you imagine if this little boy with his lunchbox had looked at what his mother probably had packed for him that day and said, oh, this is not a good day for me to share this lunch. Not now, not yet, maybe next year or maybe last year, but not now. This is just not a good time. And I think of perhaps those opportunities in my life where I've missed the chance to enter the extraordinary through the ordinary because I've said, not now, not yet. Maybe when I get older, or maybe when I was younger, then, if only, fill in the blank, if only. But this little boy, I think, changed if only to only if. Only if I have the guts right now to say, now, I don't know what they can do with this, but I've got it. Let me make it available. Ordinary was just right now, not thinking too much about it, just stepping out, making what you have available right now in this moment. I've started my own sort of informal umbrella ministry. And today, except that it stopped raining, and I'm so thankful that it did, today might have been one of those days where I could have actually done my umbrella ministry. And let me tell you about this ministry, because it's really nothing formal, and it's actually very ordinary. But I like to walk. And I live in Fullerton. And actually in Fullerton, we have quite a large homeless population. And I live sort of close to the downtown area of Fullerton. And we also have quite a few shelters and safe houses where especially women and their children can come. Now, those aren't advertised and there's no signs out in front, but if you've lived in Fullerton as long as I have, you kind of know where those are. And every once in a while, I think when I'm walking that I can maybe pick out who some of those people are. But they are especially noticeable, or at least some of the moms and children are especially noticeable on rainy days. Because often I'm walking at about the time a mom would take her kids to school. And every once in a while, I see a mom with a few kids, and they have no umbrella, and it's raining. And I think if you live in Fullerton and you know it's raining and you got to go to school, you would pull out your umbrella. But what if you have to leave fast? You don't take an umbrella when you have to leave someplace quick, and you don't have money to buy another umbrella. Well, one of the days when I was walking and I saw one of those moms, I had my umbrella. And I thought, she needs this umbrella. So I just went over and gave her my umbrella. Now, I've had the opportunity to do that a few times. I don't anticipate it or plan for it. I guess I'm a wimp, and when I walk and it's raining, I walk with an umbrella. So I happen to have one with me. About a month ago, it happened again. I was out walking with one of my umbrellas, and I saw a mom with her 2 kids, and they had no umbrella, and I thought, they might need this umbrella. So I just give them my umbrella. Now, if I waited, I wouldn't see them the next day. You often don't see them again. They just kind of disappear. So ordinary for me, a very ordinary ministry says right now with this umbrella, I can't think, is this a good umbrella? I can't run home and get a better umbrella or even not give them my best umbrella. I actually had to give one of my favorite umbrellas away about a month ago. I'm like, doggone it, Lord. I could have had another one. But that's part of just making what you have available in that moment. Ordinary is now. You sometimes can't think about it. You just got to do it. Just be who you are with what you have and let it be available. Ordinary is now. Second, ordinary is enough. It's interesting in this passage that Jesus said he already had in mind what he was going to do when he asked them, how are we going to feed these people? In fact, in one of the other accounts, in one of the other Gospels, one of the responses of the disciples was, you got to send these people home because we don't have enough. And Jesus looked at him and said, don't you dare send these people home. You figure out a way to feed them. Because I think what Jesus wanted them to know is everything you have right now is enough. And I believe that what God has ordained for you is enough to do whatever he asks for you to do. What's interesting to me? It says in this passage that the little boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Do you know that that little fact is repeated in all 4 Gospels? Other parts of the story are brought in or left out. That's sort of the way the Gospels work. But with this fact, 5 loaves, 2 fish, you will find it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 5 loaves, 2 fish. I'm thinking, who cares? Why couldn't it have been 6 loaves and 1 fish? 3 loaves and 5 fish? Why was it so important in the gospel record for it to be repeated over and over that this boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish? I might be reading a little bit into this, but I think there's something that God wants us to know. That the blend of strengths and limitations you have, that whatever you have in your lunch bag, your strengths, your limitations, is exactly what God has ordained for you to have. Your 5 loaves and 2 fish. It is so tempting to look over at that big picnic basket and say, if only I had the fried chicken or the potato salad. And God says, you look, what's in your lunchbox? 5 loaves, 2 fish, that's exactly what I have given you to use right now at this time in your life. You know, several years ago, I was speaking at a conference. And I remember it was a weekend thing, so you could kind of begin to get to know some of the people. But there was one younger gal, she was probably in her 20s, and she would always sit at a table right up here every time we met, and she was very quiet. So doing, you know, the speakerly thing during one of the breaks, I thought I should go up and just kind of befriend her. So I went up and started a conversation with her, and she was painfully shy, but I sort of got her talking a little bit, and I tried to find out what she was interested in. And she just worked some ordinary job. But she said, you know what I do? I just work my ordinary job until I can save up enough money for a plane ticket to Romania. She said, then I go over to Romania, and I go to one of the orphanages, and I hold babies. She said, that's all I do. I just hold the babies. Because no one holds the babies in those orphanages. She said, you know, one time while I was holding those babies, I put one of the babies back down in the bed, and the baby began to cry. Most of those babies don't even cry because they're not used to having any needs met by anyone. That baby was feeling loved in her arms in that moment, and when she put the baby down, the baby cried. And I felt like I was standing on holy ground. I don't even remember her name, but I will never, ever forget her story. She knew how to enter the extraordinary by way of the ordinary. She worked a regular old job, and she saved her pennies. She bought her plane ticket and went to Romania, went to some orphanage, and held babies. And she did that as often as she could, as she had money to do so. That's a girl who looked in her lunch bag and said, you know what, I'll never be a speaker. I don't even know if she went to college. But her 5 loaves and 2 fish let her do a profound ministry in the life of some Romanian babies in an orphanage. Ordinary is now, right now, with whatever you have at this moment in your lunch bag, those 5 loaves and 2 fish. And ordinary is needed. Ordinary is needed. You can't even begin to make a difference unless you let it go. You know, some of the most touching times in our family have been when we've had some struggles sometimes with finances. And I remember years ago, my husband and I were talking, and the refrigerator had gone out or something like that, and we were needing a new appliance, and we just didn't know how we would have enough money. And my son was, 3 or 4 at that time. We didn't even think he was listening. And before we know it, he's gone to his room and comes back to the kitchen and opens up his hand, and he has a bunch of coins. And he says, here, use these to buy that refrigerator. Now, obviously, those coins would never be enough to buy that refrigerator, but in that moment, did the peace of God come over us? You better believe it. There was another time where my husband was gone for a few nights, and I was home with the kids, and we had plumbing issues. It always happens when someone's gone. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and those were the days when you still had to look for a plumber in the yellow pages. Some of you probably don't even remember what that is, but they used to have a phone book with yellow pages, and I had that on the kitchen table, open to these yellow pages, trying to figure out who in the world do I call at this time of night, and I don't even know where to do this or how to do this. And while I'm sitting there with my head in my hands, my little daughter, without saying a word, but she knew I was stressed, she slid this little picture she had just colored of a rainbow right on top of my yellow pages. You see, that's 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. That was needed. She let go what she had right now in that moment, and it completely ministered to my spirit. Whatever you have, no matter how small, is exactly what your grandchildren need. It's exactly what your friends need, or whoever else God brings in your life. They need just what you have, but you have to make it available. My dad is a grandfather now, and every time he comes to visit, he leaves a $1 bill on the mantle for my grandkids. Always a $1 bill. So there's always 2 crisp $1 bills left on that mantle. Usually as soon as he comes, even if he's going to stay for 4 or 5 days, he puts that $1 bill up in the mantle just so he doesn't forget. He's done that for years. Now I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I've ever actually said this to him, but I'm like, come on, Dad, inflation, $1 bill? You know, my son is 19 and my daughter's 16. What are they going to do with a $1 bill? But he, every time he comes, leaves that $1 bill up on the mantle. And you know what? My kids have never once complained. Never. I'm the one thinking about inflation, but they aren't, because they don't care about the amount. It's the pattern of a grandfather who thinks about them, cares for them, prays for them. You know, when I was little, my grandparents, the immigrants, were actually from Sweden and Finland. And when I would sit at that breakfast table with them early in the morning, they would pray, and they would pray like they always do, but they prayed in Swedish because that was the tongue with which they were most familiar. And the only part in that prayer that I could understand was barn, barn. Barn meant children. Barn, barn meant the children of our children. And when they got to barn, barn, I knew they were praying for me. You know, so on your way out today, I have a $1 bill that I'm leaving at the door for each one of you. Actually, no, I could never afford that. But imagine if each one of us in here took out of our lunch bag a $1 bill. Think how many dollar bills we could leave at that door if each one of us just simply used the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish that God has put in our own lunchbox.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.